Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
This is an ad from BetterHelp Online Therapy. We always hear about the red flags to avoid in relationships, but it's just as important to focus on the green flags. If you're not quite sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify those qualities so you can embody the green flag energy and find it in others. BetterHelp offers therapy 100% online, and sign-up only takes a few minutes. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com.
This episode is brought to you by Abercrombie. There's nothing better than the perfect jean and going out top combo, or an outfit that perfectly matches your plans. Abercrombie's relaxed jean goes with every occasion. Date nights with something lace, or daytime with a cozy sweater. And their barrel jean will surprise you. It's the trend that will become a staple in your wardrobe. Abercrombie denim comes in tons of rises, fits, and washes. Find your perfect pair online or in store.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
We passed over a destroyed land. You have not seen it, do not know what hell looks like. We can have today only one purpose, and that is to see this thing through to the end.
Meanwhile, in the Ardennes, the Americans have recaptured the initiative, moving step by step back over the lost ground.
War is, of course, a test of endurance for those involved. The longer the war goes on, the more severe this test of endurance. This test of endurance must, under all circumstances, continue as long as the slightest hope of victory. The moment all hope of victory disappears, people's determination becomes insufficient to withstand the test of endurance. In the same way as a fortress will go on fighting as long as there is hope of relief. It is therefore vital from time to time to destroy the enemy's confidence in victory by making clear to him by means of offensive action that his plans cannot succeed. A successful defensive can never achieve this as effectively as a successful offensive. In the long run, the principle that the defensive is stronger than the offensive does not hold. We must not forget that the total manpower available on our side is still just as great as that of the enemy. Wars are, however, finally decided when one side or other realizes that the war can no longer be won. Our most important task, therefore, is to force the enemy to realize this. He will realize this most quickly when his forces have been annihilated. Adolf Hitler at the Adlerhorst, the 11th of December, 1944. It was like being there, wasn't it?
Can I just say, that was very strong.
Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk, the Second World War podcast, with me, Al Murray, in the role of Adolf Hitler there, and James Holland.
And you can tell we're a little bit demob happy after our harrowing.
God, yes, but, I mean, the interesting thing about this, and those of you with your antenna on will know exactly what this is about, but basically, this is going on at the same time as the stuff we were talking about in our Auschwitz podcast, the sort of winding up of the camp. The Germans are doing this at this point in the war.
Well, there's quite a lot to unpick in that speech, isn't there?
Yes. Well, you know what there is? It's time to destroy the enemy's confidence in victory. So basically, he's saying we know we're losing. They're going to win.
Yeah, but he says wars are, however, finally decided when one side or other realizes that war as such can no longer be won. Yeah, so why are you still fighting then?
Exactly.
But there you've got it in a nutshell. This is the Hitlerian view at the end of 1944. This is where he's coming from. And this speech to all his senior generals that's why they're doing the Battle of the Bulge. That's why they're doing
Herbstnebel. So this is what we're coming to, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first part of our series about, we're going to call it the Battle of the Bulge. Bulge because that's what it's known as, right, Jim?
Yeah, do what it says on the tin.
That's what it does, exactly what it says on the tin. And there is a bulge, and there is one heck of a battle.
One heck of a battle.
One heck of a battle. The biggest sort of American scrap of the war.
Yes, and I think it's the most iconic in American memory of World War II. I mean, obviously right up there with some of the biggies like Iwo Jima and obviously D-Day.
Yeah.
But this is seen as an all-American epic. Other people do come into play, but you can see why. And
display of American character, of the fighting spirit, what the Americans are capable of, and how the shit hits the fan, I think is the way of looking at it. And it's how the Americans then deal with that situation, which is the sort of the test in a way. Everything's been, up to this point, really, since Normandy, everything's been going their way. They've been going forwards ever since June. And this is the moment where you can argue, and certainly in the way the story's told and what the story of the Battle of Bulge represents, that's what this is about, isn't it?
Yeah. And also, I do think it's curious how the American narrative of the war gets very hung up on these setbacks.
Yes.
Kasserine, for example, in Tunisia in February 1943.
Yeah.
It's pretty small beer in the big scheme of things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that awful. And yet they really beat themselves up about it at the time. They continue to do so in the history of the campaign and the history of the war. And actually, it was, a really important lesson for them. And they learnt much more than they lost. I mean, obviously try telling that to the parents of the son that gets killed.
Yeah.
But, we're talking broad brushes here. And that's certainly the case. And what is, I don't want to kind of eat my sandwiches before we've started, but what has impressed me about doing a deep dive into the Bulge is just how effective and quick to act the Americans are. Yeah. And again, I think we'll get on to intelligence failures in the second half of this episode, but for my money, it's been pretty overblown. I don't think it's that big a deal.
But the thing is, I think I've been pondering on since we went there, and maybe this will be excised and put into sort of a wash up this thought. But basically, given that the Cold War is all about expecting the Soviets to attack at some point and how the Americans are going to deal with that, right? And were that confrontation to have happened, they'd have never been taken by surprise because the build-up would have been what it was. It would have been evident what was coming, right? Yet the Americans look to this as their moment where they're caught with their trousers down and still repulse these great rolling columns of tanks and all that sort of stuff. And it's as if, I don't know, there's just something, a pure test of the American fighting man's character in this battle. You can see why it would become a touchstone. Like Dunkirk, you can see why it would become that. Right, so this is episode 1, entitled Hitler's Mad Plan, which I think is the best way of looking at this.
Like to keep our listeners in the clear.
I mean, the origins of it, really, a decisive counterattack has always been part of Hitler's thinking since Overlord began, isn't it? And
well, no, it's just his military DNA. I mean, that's how he thinks of everything. You don't sit back and take it. You counterattack at every available opportunity. To be fair, that's part of the Prussian plan, isn't it? I mean, we've talked a lot about German troops get attacked. The Pavlovian response is always to counterattack. Yeah. Hitler thinks offensively, not defensively.
Yeah. Even though, I mean, the irony is, and again, in that speech, there's a lot to unpick. The Germans are making things very, very, very hard on the defensive for the Allies. This offensive, the Bulge offensive, Hurstnable, follows directly after, from an American perspective, after the Hurtgen battle, where the Germans in defence have been making things extremely difficult for the Allies and running their resources down and running their manpower into the ground and breaking their morale. And you think, actually, mein Führer, in the grand scheme of things, it's going quite well here in terms of holding the enemy up. They haven't got to the Rhine yet, and we're grinding them down. You could argue that if you're Model or whoever, couldn't you? Quite easily. But they don't, because they can't.
They can't, no.
No. I mean, it's in August when instructions are issued by OKW for the 20th of August for an offensive rebound.
Yep.
So even as Normandy is folding in on itself, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, for those who don't know what OKW is. So
the German Combined General Staff.
Yeah. And then they have another plan where they're going to go not through the Ardennes, but attack the Americans on the Third Army on the River Marne.
Well, of course, it's the Third Army that's doing the big strike, across France and stuff. So you can see why the thinking is at that point. But again, it's just underlying the message here that Hitler is always thinking about counterattack. Yeah. It's not just sit back and take it.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because these keep getting cancelled in the same way that sort of Allied plans to leap forward keep getting cancelled as well. That there's, there isn't a moment to strike. And one of the things that characterises the Hurstnable, the Ardennes offensive, is there is kind of a moment to strike because things have sort of not gone into stasis of such, but has really slowed by December in a way that, in August, September, the lines are very, very fluid and moving fast, and the Germans are really on the back foot.
So Hitler's plans for kind of counterattacks are, they're being flung into the mud is being hurled at the wall in kind of quick succession. I mean, Walter Warlimont, who's he's a general deputy chief of operations staff at the OKW, and he kept these diaries and wrote this very, book which has been incredibly helpful for generations of historians looking at this, about the inner workings of the OKW and how it works. And he says, these ambitious plans were another example of Hitler's disregard of the rules of time and space. Moreover, he took no account of the fact that the forces at his disposal were extremely weak. The plans, accordingly, came to nothing as soon as they were born. He's absolutely right. And Hitler never has any regard for time and space. I mean, he doesn't think like that.
No.
And, this makes life in the OKW, where they're trying to prepare these plans, and also the OKH, which is the Oberkommando der Heere, which is the command of the army, incredibly difficult. But after the fall of Antwerp, which really shocks Hitler, Jodl finally persuades him that no offensive can be launched before the 1st of November. They're just in too much disarray. They're spread to the four winds. They need to have a kind of a pullback trade space for time and get behind the Siegfried line and reorganize themselves and think about what assets they've still got, what can still be achieved. And don't forget, all this time, German cities are getting absolutely hammered. And it's a completely different scenario to how it was in 1943 or even the very beginning of 1944, because the Allies have effective command of the skies. There's Me-262 jets flying around, but they're in a bomber role rather than a fighter role. And whatever the Luftwaffe can put up in the skies as nothing compared to what the Allies can bring to bear. And so these bombers are coming over, and it's not just heavy four-engine bombers, B-17s, Liberators and Lancasters and so on. It's also these medium bombers that are hurtling in at kind of much faster speeds, at lower heights, and absolutely hammering bridges. And the Reichsbahn, which is very much the glue that keeps German operations in existence, is taking an absolute hammering at this time. So that's why Warlimont is absolutely right. And Hitler does accept this.
Yeah. What's Jodl's persuasion technique to convince the Fuhrer? How does he deal with Hitler? What's his style? Because
he says, yes, and then he says, but.
Right. Okay. There are all these sort of tricks of the trade, aren't there? Where what you do is you listen to what Hitler's said, then you go away and you come back in and you offer a sort of watered down version of it. They've all got their sort of managed styles to manage the boss.
Well, you've done some work on Jodl, and I've done and Keitel and Servai. Keitel is the chief of staff, and both of them are still slavishly devoted to Hitler at this point. That's the extraordinary thing. So they are yes men. I mean, Keitel is known as La Keitel, which is a sort of lackey. And again, right at the top, everyone hates one another, and
all the usual.
It's all a complete mess. But anyway, I mean, the point is, Hitler is determined to have his counterattack. It's going to happen. Whether it happens, in November or whether it happens later is, what the German planners are hoping is that they can just kick it down the road until it becomes so obvious that it can't happen that it never happens. But he's not to be deterred. 11th of September, Hitler announces the reconstitution of the 6th Panzer Army, and this is under the command of Obergruppenführer Sepp Dietrich. And again, this is another consequence of the July plot against Hitler's life, the Stauffenberg plot, where there was an assassination attempt at the Wolfschanz, at the Wolf's Lair in Rastenburg in East Prussia. And Sepp Dietrich is an old street fighter. Yeah. He's an SS man through and through. He hasn't been to staff college. He hasn't been trained. He's just worked his way up through the ranks. And, he's not much cop as an army commander, but he is a loyal SS man.
Yeah, exactly. He's an old fighter, isn't he? So, of course, he's in the, inner circle. What that means is that 6th Panzer Army, who are going to feature large in this, don't have a competent boss.
They don't have a competent boss, but they have more kit than anybody else.
They're more kit. So it's the sort of...
all the gear and no idea.
Well, it's the swings and roundabouts of being, within SS patronage, isn't it? Within Hitler's patronage. Because you get the stuff, but the bloke in charge is hopeless. And he really doesn't know what he's doing. You can say that, can't you? He has no idea what he's doing, and yet has been trusted with something, as far as the Führer's concerned, really important. So,
well, it's going to be the spearhead of any new offensive. But also, there's changes at the top as well in the West, because Field Marshal Model has only taken over from Army Group B. Yeah. He's also, after von Kluger's died, he's taken over as acting Commander-in-Chief of OB West, and OB West is the kind of overall high command for the West of Europe. And instead, he's been reduced back to just Army Group B. Army, and which is the group of armies in the West, and von Rundstedt, Gert von Rundstedt, Field Marshal Gert von Rundstedt, who was, after all, commander of Army Group A back in 1940, is back as OB West, having been sacked in July or whenever it was, 1944. So, von Rundstedt is this character who has nothing but contempt for Hitler, but is a Prussian, right-wing Prussian of the old order, and just constantly being sacked and reinstated.
The thing is, it's the organisational chaos in that 2 minutes of explaining who's been moved where and all that. All you're hearing is organisational chaos.
And frankly, any listener who's listening to this, that's all they need to know.
That's, total chaos. And
you don't need to worry about von Rundstedt again.
Exactly.
The modal will keep coming up.
Yeah, don't worry about him. Well, and also chaos and important jobs going to absolute duds like Dietrich. So, I think people very often in this phase of the war, the autumn of 1944, they're looking at the Allied command structure and they're looking for where the wrinkles are and they're looking for who's butting heads and they're looking for the sort of organisational shortcomings within SHAEF and how's Ike handling his subordinates and how the subordinates dealing with each other and how's he getting on with his government and how's he getting on with the British government. Whoa! Compared to this lot, it's nothing, isn't it?
It's absolutely perfect. Yes, it couldn't be more streamlined. But, obviously, Hitler's still banging his drum about the counteroffensive and Jodel's told him it can't be before November, but he's still thinking about it literally constantly.
Yeah.
And obviously in September and October, you've got Operation Market Garden, you've got the attack on Aachen, you've got sort of, Third Army pushing up towards Metz, etc. You've got 7th Army and 6th Army Group in the south kind of pushing northward. So there's an awful lot going on. And it's kind of sort of unremitting, the kind of scale of the attacks against the German lines. And they're struggling to keep going. But at the same time, Hitler's still talking about this major offensive. On the 14th of September, Hitler says, actually, do you want to do this? Because you're in such a good vein with Hitler.
In the Siegfried Line, every foot of ground, not merely the fortifications, is to be treated as a fortress.
As a Festung.
A Festung. That he's talking about fortresses and Festungs and all that sort of thing just shows his thinking has simply not got into the 1940s yet, has it?
No. He's just all over the place. I mean, it is absolutely wacko. 2 days later, an order is signed by Jodl, but it is from Hitler. But I'm going to do it in Jodel's voice.
Go for it.
In the combat zone, every able-bodied man must give his utmost. Every bunker, every dugout, every town, every village must become a Festung against which the enemy will beat his head in vain, or in which the German garrison goes under in hand-to-hand combat. I mean, that is just pure Hitler, isn't it? I mean, it's also wacko. I mean, it is, we've called this episode Hitler's Mad Plan for a reason.
Yeah. I mean, you get that in the post. Oh, great. We've got to go down in hand-to-hand combat.
We've got to go
under. What's that, boss? And of course, I mean, the thing is, and Sepp Dietrich is part of this picture, there are people who are prepared to do that, who are going to read that and go, brilliant, can't wait, bring it on, come at me, the Yammies, come on, Tommy Atkins.
Yes.
There are people who...
Yeah, but I'll let you into a secret, there's even more who think this is crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's it.
So just because they're in such a strong offensive mind, on the 25th of September, Hitler decrees the formation of a home guard. And this, of course, is a Volkssturm. And you suddenly are relying on Captain Mannering.
Yeah.
But German. Hauptmann Mainwaring.
Vormington und See. I mean...
Vormington und See.
The threat of invasion prompts the British to do this. The Germans have been invaded. There are Allied soldiers, on German soil by the 25th of September, aren't there?
Yeah.
Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry are in Germany by this point. And that's what it takes that to get the Germans to organise a home guard.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Seems very last minute.
Was it 23rd, 21st, its first day in Germany, isn't it? Yeah. And while they're doing so, Volkssturm speaks of the last redoubt, doesn't it? On the very same time that they're forming the Volkssturm, their operations staff at the OKW are also ordered to make preparations for this major offensive that Hitler's so determined to have. And by the end of September, the OKW's preliminary studies conclude that the Monschau-Echterach area offers the best prospects. So that's just a little bit further north where the main line of the Bulge comes. It's in the kind of northern shoulder, basically.
Yeah. Hitler's demanding then a thrust from there to Antwerp.
We'll get to Antwerp, we'll take back the Allies' key port, split them in two, so the Canadians and the British will be on the northern side of that line, Americans to the south, they'll then implode. That's the idea.
Yeah. Yes, it's going to destroy the alliance. The British will have to undertake a second Dunkirk. He's just trying to play the greatest hits, isn't he? Split the Allied armies.
What he's saying, while there's still hope, I'm going to protract the war. Anyway, the first plans are submitted by Jodl in great secrecy on the 9th of October 1944.
Yeah.
And even von Rundstedt, we told you he didn't need to know about him.
Yeah,
He's not informed about Operation Wacht am Rhein, just watch on the Rhine.
Well, hardly anyone knows. This is the stage when sort of a dozen people know about this.
Yes, but they have worked out where it's going to be at this point. Yeah. So there is going to be a drive from one sweep from the Eifel region, which is a sort of wooded hill, sort of, it's not quite mountainous, it's high hills rather than mountains. And the Eifel sort of bleeds into the Ardennes region of Luxembourg and Belgium, and across the river Ourthe and the Meuse. And the Meuse, of course, is the mighty Meuse. It's a big old boy at this stage. I mean, I've been there so many times, but it must be sort of 70 meters wide, something like that. If not a bit more, 100.
Proper
perhaps.
obstacle.
It's big.
Yeah, you need to get over it.
There's no question that Hitler's trying to reconstruct the offensive of his greatest triumph, which is Case Yellow back in May 1940. Yeah. And in actual fact, the crossings around Dinant, which is one of the areas where they are planned to cross in Wacht am Rhein, is where Rommel crosses.
Right.
First units are over just before midnight on the 12th of May 1940. Yeah. And even the timing's the same, 3 days to the Meuse and across by 4. So as in 1940, everything depends on speed of movement and surprise and catching the enemy unaware and getting those key moments, key towns, crossroads towns, bridges, getting across rivers before the enemy has had an opportunity to kind of think what's going on. And speed and surprise are absolutely the key.
Yeah. And with that, Hitler thinks that the Allies are incapable of speed because he thinks Eisenhower will need to, that he's not the supreme commander, that what he's going to have to do is ask permission to move troops about.
Which is what happens to German commanders, of course.
Yes, of course. So he's judging it, but literally judging it, the Allies by his own standards, his own methods.
Yeah, and he's also assuming that the Allies are too lumbering and too kind of dependent on vehicles and there aren't enough roads and they won't be able to respond quickly enough and all the rest of it. He hasn't sort of taken note of the fact that they actually move faster in the opposite direction than the German troops had done in the 10 days of the 10th to the 20th of May 1940. So, there's a whole host of problems with Hitler's premise right from the word go. But be that as it may, on the 22nd of October, von Rundstedt's chief of staff, you really can forget about him now, General Siegfried Westphal, and Modell's chief of staff, General Hans Krebs, and he reappears in Berlin at the end of the war, are summoned to the Wolfschanze. Both are they have no idea what this is going to be about, and they're both worried that they're going to be berated for the loss of Aachen. And instead, they're told him to sort of, sign their life away on pain of death. And then the plan for Wacht am Rhein is revealed by Jodl.
I mean, and it literally is on pain of death. Death level top secrecy.
I mean, I'm laughing now, but I mean, you're not if you're Westphal or Krebs.
No, God. And especially as you think...
You're taking a really, really major gulp.
Yeah. You've come for a bollocking, and then I've got to sign a thing that if I... Anyway, awful, isn't it? After lunch is a situation conference, 15 men in total presence. And then the plan starts to be revealed. Hitler does his thing where he says... There's going to be 2,000 aircraft to back this, don't you worry.
Yeah. So it's going to be double the size of Luftwaffe, which is the failed Mortain offensive totally failed where not a single plane turned up. But this time it's all going to be fine. God. I mean, anyone who's sort of studied the form charts will not be reassured by this speech.
No.
Anyway, it's going to be, the plan is, this is a master plan. So actually, although he was very impatient to get going in September or October, actually... the whole moving into November thing could really work in the Germans' favour because this is the period of fogs. So the main assault is going to be by 6th Panzer Army, just to the south of the Hürtgen Forest. And then General Hasso von Manteuffel, who's newly commanding the 5th Panzer Army and who's been promoted from divisional commander to army commander without a corps in the middle, is going to support on the southern flank of 6th Panzer Army. 6th Panzer Army is going to be the main assault. And then 7th Army, last seen being completely annihilated in Normandy, is going to be the south. And they will see off any attacks from the US 3rd Army.
Which is Patton.
So this is the master plan. But of course, there's a fatal flaw right in the essential premise, which is you want to go in a time of fog so that you're negating the effects of Allied air power, but that's also going to negate the effects of your air power, which you're promising is such a key part of the whole thing.
Well, the 2,000 planes you've just promised.
But good luck, Westphal and Krebs, pointing that one out to the Führer. Anyway.
Should we take a quick break, Jim? There's a little bit more planning to come. Hitler arm wrestles everyone into submission. We'll be back in a second.
Hey, Fidelity. What's it cost to invest with the Fidelity app?
Start with as little as $1 with no account fees or trade commissions on U.S. stocks and ETFs.
That's music to my ears.
I can only talk.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Zero account fees apply to retail brokerage accounts only. Sell order assessment fee not included. A limited number of ETFs are subject to a transaction-based service fee of $100. See full list at fidelity.com/commissions. Fidelity Brokerage Services LLC, member NYSE SIPC.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Whether it's a movie night or just midday, Skinny Pop is a salty snack that keeps on giving. Made with just 3 simple ingredients for an irresistibly delicious taste and a large serving size that lasts. Deliciously popped, perfectly salted. Skinny Pop, popular for a reason. Shop Skinny Pop now.
We passed over a destroyed land.
Welcome back to Way of Ways of Making You Talk. German planning for the Battle of the Bulge, Jim. They're not calling it that at this point, of course.
They're calling it Wacht am Rhein.
Wacht am Rhein. Well, although by this point, once the orders have gone out that are not to be altered, by the beginning of December, it's called Herbstnebel by now, isn't it? Autumn mist.
Herbstnebel.
Which is very confusing because it's the winter, even the name. It's got the mist in it, though, that they're going to rely on, of course.
Yes, of course. That's essential to the whole plan. But the Luftwaffe will be able to go through it, even though the Allies can't. At this point, von Rundstedt and Mödel are now allowed to be informed, again under pain of death, and immediately go, this is nuts. What about some more modest objectives?
I mean, Model is essentially a yes man, isn't he? That you've got characters like him going, sucking their teeth and going, I'm not sure about that. One of the things they're worried about is in order to get this going, divisions are going to have to be pulled out from the front right away, reinforced, re-equipped, retrained, remanned, restocked. And so they're thinking, well, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. We might be giving the enemy an opportunity here, even in preparing for it. And immediately Model had to send 116th Panzer Division to Hurtgen to help retake Schmidt. And also, 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, they can't be pulled out because they're holding Patton's Third Army. So even getting ready for this is creating problems, isn't it? I mean, this is...
Yeah, but Rundstedt doesn't book up, and then after this, we really, really can't forget about him. You know, he just goes, okay, whatever. I mean, he's done arguing with the Fuhrer. He's done everything. He wants out. He's so done with it by this point. Model, who is a absolutely devoted Nazi and very much the calming man and incredibly proactive and has been incredibly effective on the Eastern Front, even he is deeply skeptical.
Yeah.
You know, this plan hasn't got a damned leg to stand on, says Model.
Yeah.
You know, and instead of these gram slam targets, as they call them, which is i.e. Antwerp, he wants little slam objectives. So together, Rundstedt and Model work on a different plan with their chiefs of staff, which is much more modest and basically just get to the Meuse. But of course, if you're only going to get to the Meuse, there's no point in doing it. I mean, obviously, there's no point in doing it full stop. Well, you're just pushing back the line and you're putting extra strain on the Americans and you're buying yourself space and time.
Arguably, you're creating a longer line for yourself, so you're more exposed and you're more prone to being sliced up and torn to pieces.
Yes, and it's clear that they don't think even that one's got much chance of success. So they're trying to kind of sort of save lives, save their troops for when they really need them, which is on the defense of Germany. Hitler's absolutely set on it and won't.
It's still got to happen, yeah.
And on the 27th of October, the little slam ideas are discussed at Model's headquarters at Krefeld with Dietrich and Manteuffel and Brandenberger, who's there as the commander of the 7th Army. And Model accepts von Rundstedt's bigger little plan, recognizes he needs Rundstedt's support and a unified front. And Jodl is also very open to the plan. But of course, Hitler is having none of it. You know, if they're going to do this, it's got to be with the objective of taking Antwerp. You know, they go, but my Führer, you know, the shortages of fuel, the shortages of manpower. You know, no, don't want to hear it. You know, he's putting his hands over his ears and going, la, 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 you know.
It's fascinating rather than, he can't say, well, sack it off, can he? He can't say, let's not bother then. It's fascinating, isn't it? Everyone knows. I mean, does he know it can't be Antwerp in the end, inside somewhere? That's impossible to know, isn't it? Then, I mean, Jodl, it's interesting. Von Rundstedt, we keep saying we can forget about him. He then puts his views into writing. And even Guderian, who's Army Chief of Staff, and, you know, the great hero of 1940, after all, the previous Ardennes offensive, he says, no, it's going to mess up our Eastern Front. We're dealing with the Soviets here as well, causes problems there. And then Jodl then backs Hitler. I mean, you could see them all like all this fighting for position, even when war's lost.
Yeah. And Jodl goes, in our current situation, we cannot shrink from staking everything on one card.
Oh, God. And the gambling language in there, and we'll talk about the idea that it's a gamble at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, so the planning continues is the long and short of it. And they can do all their little slam plans for all they like. You know, Hitler's not to be deterred. And so the Field Commander Conference in Berlin is held on the 23rd of November. And big concern is fuel for obvious reasons. You know, they have big tanks which require a huge amount of fuel. I mean, even their self-propelled guns, you know, Jagdpanthers, they're huge. And the problem is actually they have stockpiled a huge amount of fuel. So they probably have got enough fuel to get to Antwerp. The problem is they can't get it to the front because of Allied bombing.
Yeah.
You know, Manteuffel's requested fuel for 500 kilometres, but actually they only have enough for 150, you know, on a good day.
Yeah, and as we'll see, the terrain creates fuel-guzzling situations anyway. That stopping and getting stuck, you know, it being cold, all these things also bite into what your fuel consumption's.
Yeah, so actually, Keitel's stockpiled 17.4 million litres of fuel, which is a huge amount for the Germans. I mean, that really is a huge amount. It also becomes clear that November's not going to be the month. It's going to have to be December, and this is because of shattered units and the time it takes to get everything in place and move stuff up and move up stockpiles of ammunition and get everything ready. I mean, the operational level of this scale of this is absolutely enormous to kind of get 3 armies on the go, on the offensive at the same time with all your lines of supply running smoothly, which you'll need if you're going to have speed. You know, that takes time. And also the other big thing is training people to do this, because a lot of these units are completely reconstituted. They're what I call Phoenix divisions, these ones that have been completely annihilated. And then kind of sort of brought up again. And one of the problems is they're running out of manpower, but they're also running out of trained manpower to man all this equipment. You know, it takes quite a thing to drive a Panther tank or a Tiger or even a King Tiger. You know, these are not simple, straightforward beasts. On the 2nd of December, Model, Dietrich and Manteuffel are in Berlin for their final briefing, presumably Brandenburger as well. Hitler's orders unchanged, and he adds, not to be altered. Model's fatalistic. Manteuffel secretly decided just to drop the little slam plan anyway.
Yeah.
He thinks, well, I'll try and get the MERS and just leave it at that. But secrecy is still absolutely paramount. Manteuffel is quite an interesting character, absolutely pint-sized. He's like 5'2" or something. He's part of the Prussian elite, which is exactly the kind of person that Hitler normally hates, but Hitler really has taken the shine to him. So he's in the Hitlerian spotlight.
He's a good soldier, isn't he? A brilliant soldier. So, you know, in contrast to Dietrich, that plays out when the battle begins, doesn't it? That their difference in experience and approach. And he's smart enough to know, I'm going to end up running the battle my way, so I'm going to run the battle my way, rather than thinking, you know.
But also one of the reasons why Hitler likes him is because he's a striking, aggressive kind of assault commander. And he says, surprise when it succeeds is a decisive part of the success of the Panzer formation. Slackness, softness, etc. amongst all ranks must be sternly put down. So basically, von Manteuffel is not the sort of person you want to cross, really.
Yeah.
He might be small, but inside beats the heart of a giant.
Well, he's small, but a perfectly formed soldier, I think is a
perfectly formed Nazi soldier.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about this is this real mania for secrecy around this plan. You know, commanders down to corps commanders, chief artillery officers are allowed to know. And again, on pain of death to them and their families.
It's also extreme.
It is extreme. And, you know, corps artillery commanders, you know, they have to go to the gun positions themselves, that you get your maps at the last minute. And the maps are not brilliant. You know, they're using Michelin road maps. A lot of people are using pre-war French road maps, European road maps.
Can you imagine anything more annoying? If you're a German panzer commander and everyone's going, you've got to be really quick, you've got to be really quick. And you go, okay, well, we'll take this road. And you get there and it just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Scheiße.
Yeah, exactly. Well, or it does exist, but it's not tarmacked.
Later on in the series, we're looking at that moment where Bearline's force are approaching Bastogne, and you know the road just runs out.
Yes,
goes into a track. And actually, we went down there the other day, didn't we?
Found that for ourselves the other day. Yeah. It's this thing, isn't it? Even as they're organising, they're reorganising. So Panzer regiments in the Panzer divisions are given Kampfgruppe status, you know, battle group status, with additional troops, mobile artillery, recce troops. So you've reorganised, and then you're reorganising on top of the reorganisation.
Yeah,
well.
I mean, we should just explain how that works. So basically, what you do in a Panzer division, you would have a Panzer regiment, which would be predominantly panzers. Then you'd have an infantry regiment, which would be motorized, panzer grenadiers. Then you'd have artillery. Then you'd have anti-aircraft artillery. You'd also have engineers. You'd also have a reconnaissance battalion. And these are all in units, which everyone knows. That's the idea. Although obviously in this state, everyone's a bit new because they're constantly being reconstituted. So that's your basic structure, and everyone understands that and knows that. What you're doing with a battle group is you're then saying, actually, we're going to change this around and we're going to put this panzer regiment is going to be one battle group, and attached to that is going to be a part of the anti-aircraft guns, artillery we've got, and the field artillery, and a couple of reconnaissance troops, and you're going to have some infantry attached as well. So suddenly you've got this unit that is not used to working together under a commander that people are unfamiliar with. And of course, it works to an extent because you've got a sort of scale of discipline within the German armed forces that is pretty strong. But it doesn't matter how good your discipline is. It still doesn't sort of get away from the fact that these are troops that are new to operating together. And you're asking them to do this in winter on roads that they're not familiar with. And it's very different to May 1940, where people had spent months training for this.
Yeah. Well, this is my point. It's what I was just going to say. Is these are lots of new troops who are only just trained. They haven't trained together. So these are, improvised organizations on top of reorganizations. And also there is some units look down on others, don't they? They regard others as inefficient or as not up to snuff. The Waffen-SS people regard themselves as snazzy and elite, which isn't to say they are, but that's how they see themselves, right? Yeah. There's these very peculiar Fallschirmjäger formations that who they really are, that we'll talk about who's actually in those divisions. They're not the paratroopers of 1940, let's put it that way. They're not Studentsmen. It's all this in the clinch, things start going wrong. The SS people look down on the Volksgrenadier people who are sniffy about the Fallschirmjäger people, and you've got the thing with the German model in these Phoenix divisions. You have the NCOs running, experienced NCOs running through them like a stick of rock. It's like a tree of crystals. You grow the rest of the thing off the NCOs, and those NCOs very often know more than the officers who've been brought in and are also new. So you've got this peculiar tension within each formation, and we'll see, that a Fallschirmjäger unit later on in the story who suffer from this problem where basically the sergeant major knows make attacks properly, but his commanding officer doesn't. And as a result, they take an appalling kicking. We'll get to that. But it's this sort of...
There isn't anything like the consistency that you have in 1940. So I mean, one of the things is that the 1940 army is overblown in terms of how we view it. But what is absolutely clear is that it's the spearheads, it is the mobile and armoured spearheads that are doing all the hard running in 1940. And they are the elite of the German army that has been training, throughout the 1930s. Yeah. And they've got some extremely experienced men. They haven't all been slaughtered on the Eastern Front at this stage. And so they are really, really good. And they are supremely trained. And it's summer.
And the enemy the French and the BEF have no idea what's coming at them. They haven't caught up yet. Whereas the American army, as we'll see, has caught up with the modern way of doing warfare by this point.
So the situation is just totally different. The only thing that's similar is the kind of sort of the neck of the woods in which this is going to be enacted. The leading strike forces have been given this Kampfgruppe status. The idea is that the infantry is going to do the initial breakthrough, and then these Kampfgruppe, these battle groups, will just burst through and just speed on ahead. Because the idea is that you've only got the enemy to deal with on the crust. Once you've broken through the crust, then the path is clear, and you just keep going because you can't have sort of tens of thousands of troops all the way back to Antwerp. So that's the thinking behind it. But there are, of course, other plans as well, because this is a Hitlerian plan. So there's Operation Stürzer, which is using Kampfgruppe Heiter. So they've even got camp battle groups with the Fallschirmjäger under Oberst, which is Colonel Friedrich von der Heiter, who is formerly the commanding officer of the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, Fallschirmjäger being paratroopers, but is now commander of the Fallschirmjäger Army Combat School. And he is ordered to form a force of 1,200 paratroopers to drop by air behind enemy lines and then secure these key junctions. I mean, in theory, this is a pretty sound idea. It's the same principle as Market Garden, for example. And he's to do this south of Eupen in the northern sector and prevent the US reinforcements from our area. But they're not really trained for this anymore. That's the problem. And again, in 1940, the Fallschirmjäger have been at it for ages. They know exactly what they're about. They've got, highly trained transport pilots and crews. They know what they're about. These guys just haven't been trained in parachute drops. So it means
only 1,200 of them as well. This is, it's half a brigade or half a regiment.
It's nothing.
It's nothing.
So there's no sort of looking at the British and American lessons learned from Market Garden, for example.
No. They haven't got the aircraft. They're promised 112 Ju-52s. I mean, it's these promises that I always think with aircraft are always the...
But half of those, the pilots haven't even flown paratroopers before. Never done it. Von der Heide just thinks, what the heck? He's trying to find out more about his mission. Beppo Schmidt, who was the commander of the German fighter force, suggests splitting his force into two. Then Model says, don't worry, you've only got less than 10% chance of success. More like less than 1%, I'd say. He then goes to see Dietrich. The whole thing seems hopeless. The only person who offers any kind of positive help at all is Brigadier Führer Kramer, who is Dietrich's chief of staff. Kramer's really good. I mean, he's really super common. He's basically running
Kramer's basically how Dietrich is able to function commanding Panzer Army, isn't it? If it weren't for him, the whole thing would grind to complete halt, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, Kramer says, look, forget all this 2-drop thing. Just do one. You're quite right. That's absolutely the way to go. 1 drop, 12 SS will relieve you within 24 hours. So they are specifically for this northern thrust. That is what they're for, which is, after all, the main thrust. The prime objective is that northernmost thrust coming through the Krinkeltenveld.
Krinkeltenveld, yeah. And then the next part, which is the plan for Otto Skorzeny, Obersturmbannführer Skorzany's SS commander's play role. This is the sort of part that's got into people's imagination, hasn't it? What Scorsese's going to do. It's a complete waste of time. And he's given unlimited powers by Hitler for his mission, which, all he has to say is by order of Reichsführer, and it will happen. Something that's all right. Well, really? He creates 150 Panzer Brigade for Operation Greif. Yes. Splits his force into 2. Einheit Stylau, which is a special command. And this is the thing I think people have heard of. Special commando unit of 150 men. They're all supposed to be English speakers and wear American kit and drive captured jeeps. And the thing is they can't get the English speakers, can they? Not really. Yes. They've got a few.
I would like a milkshake and a Coca-Cola. It's that kind of thing. Do you have any bubble gum? It's this kind of stuff. It just it doesn't really work. And also, obviously there's the Führer order, which is, any guys operating behind enemy lines are basically spies and therefore to be treated as such and shot immediately. Yeah. So obviously they can expect exactly the same treatment in return. But obviously this is of no concern to Hitler whatsoever. So what? Fine.
And then 150 Panzer Brigade, who are like in captured Shermans and stuff. And they've got decoys, haven't they? They've got tanks disguised as M10s and all this sort of...
But I mean, how's that going to work? I mean, that's supposed to sort of cause confusion and chaos. Yeah, that's exactly what it's going to cause. But not just for the enemy.
Yeah, for you as much for anyone else. It's completely bonkers. But I think, to be honest, ending on that note about Skorzeny saying it's completely bonkers is really to qualify the entire thing. When we were there not so long ago, I got not despondent about Herr Schnabel, but sort of angry about it because the nihilism of this offensive. They're not going to get to Antwerp. We said it earlier. Then what? They get across the Meuse. Then what? They're not going to get to Antwerp. They're not going to get to. None of it's going to work. None of it. The entire thing is pointless. The key takeaway from the Battle of the Bulge from Herr Schnabel, it's pointless. They will not achieve their objectives. They are not strong enough to achieve their objectives.
Yeah.
And so every life expended on this is pure waste of life at the stage of the war when the Germans cannot win. And they couldn't win 6 months ago, but now they really can't win now. And I think
it's not Hitler's last gamble. It's Hitler's last bonkers offensive decision.
Precisely. There are plenty of other gambles in the war that can be characterized as this, but this is not a gamble. It
is a plan senza speranza, as I say in Italy.
Exactly.
Hope.
Exactly. Right. Well, on that note,
it's good to get it underway, though, isn't it?
Yeah. In our next episode, we'll be looking at the American situation. And if you want to listen to all these in one go to our Apple channel, become officer class, or subscribe to our Patreon, our We Have Ways to Make You Talk Patreon, and you'll get these episodes ad-free and all in one enormous digestible bulge rather than lump on this occasion. We will see you very, very soon. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.